to our webinar for today. My name is Rachel Reed, and I'm one of the technical accounting managers here at LeaseQuery. I will be hosting and presenting today, but before we get into that, do want to walk through some housekeeping items. We're going to be walking through what is SaaS spend and why accountants should care. Please join us at slido.com using code 102 if you would like to answer our polling questions. The link is on your screen here. If you scan that or use the code, should bring you to slido.com. We're going to be using this for our CPE today. Speaking of which, this webinar will be good for 1 hour of CPE credit. There are going to be 4 polling questions that you're going to be able to respond to. But first, let us know that GoToWebinar is even working okay for you, that you can see the slides and hear us by going into the questions box onto the GoToWebinar dashboard. You can use this to let us know if you have any technical difficulties or if you have any questions. And again, you're going to want to use the QR code to access slido.com. That's what we're going to be using for our polling questions. Put in code 102. You're going to need to answer 3 of these 4 polling questions that we're going through. And again, they'll be on Slido. Make sure when you do open Slido that you use the name and email address that you registered for this webinar with so that we can match that to the data. You'll need to stay on for at least 50 minutes as well as answer those polling questions. If you are logged into today's presentation for at least 50 minutes on GoToWebinar and answer a minimum of 3 of those 4 polling questions, you'll get an email with a link to download the certificate in a couple of business days for that 1 CPE credit hour. You can access a PDF version of today's slides in the handout section of GoToWebinar dashboard. Finally, if you have any questions about CPE or the presentation in general, feel free to contact us at cpeinfo@leasequery.com. Finally, at the end of today's webinar, you are going to be sent an evaluation. Please fill it out and give us any feedback so that we can improve our future webinar programs. Thank you so much for your patience with those administrative items. Now we're going to jump right in here. Again, my name is Rachel Reed. I'm one of the technical accounting managers here at LeaseQuery. I'm here to provide more of an accounting aspect and resource for the presentation today, and my contact information is listed here on the screen. Been at LeaseQuery almost 5 years now, helping both clients and prospective clients better understand how our software and the new lease accounting standards work. But I'm joined today by Stephen Hester, and I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So to introduce myself, I'm a lead solutions engineer here with LeaseQuery, and I have a background in designing and implementing software solutions, both in the SaaS and specifically the SaaS management space for clients of varying sizes and industries. So I'm really excited to talk with everyone here today about how SaaS management can ultimately benefit your organization.
Thanks, Stephen. All right, so for those of you who haven't joined a LeaseQuery webinar today or before, welcome. For those of you that have, this slide that you see now might look a little bit different than usual. That's because LeaseQuery actually had an acquisition of a SaaS spend management platform called Stackshine. LeaseQuery's mission is to empower accounting and finance teams by simplifying the complex, and this acquisition illustrates our commitment to that mission by tackling an increasingly crucial issue for organizations, which is SaaS spend management. And that's actually going to be the subject of our discussion today. So, agenda is we're going to talk through what is SaaS, help you understand some of the basic concepts behind it, and then getting into what is SaaS spend management, why you should care. I'll be going through that section, and then Stephen will be walking through some optimization strategies and some platforms and items that you should be aware of. But before we just jump right in, we do want to launch our very first polling question of the day. And that is, what do you think of when you hear SaaS? As a reminder, this is through slido.com. You'll want to put in the code on your screen here to answer these polling questions. If you do answer 3 of the 4 polling questions of the day and stay on for at least 50 minutes, you'll be eligible for 1 CPE hour. But let us know what you think of when you hear SaaS. All right, looks like a lot of you are saying software as a service, so that's good. That is what it stands for. I'm seeing complicated, complex, technology. No idea what it is, so I'm glad you're here today so we can talk through it. I don't know. SPIDAs. Wow, GASB 96. All right, I'm seeing a lot of really great responses. Keep them coming here. Sassy accounting work. Recurring revenue, ADP. Wow, okay. So we're going to leave this open for a few minutes, let you all get your thoughts in here for what you think of when you think of SaaS. And maybe by the end of the presentation today, it'll be a little bit different than what you're putting in on this initial question. I'm gonna leave this open for a little bit longer. Still see some people are typing. Someone said cost savings, no clue. My company, so be interested to see where you work. Data in the cloud, which we'll be talking about today. More work, cloud-based software. So a lot of pretty similar concepts here, but it looks like there's definitely some places for improvement when it comes to understanding this, as a lot of you said this was complex or that you didn't quite understand it. So we're going to be talking about that today and why you should care. I'm going to leave this open for just a few more seconds. Be sure to answer the polling questions if you were interested in being eligible for CPE. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this down. Thank you, everyone, for answering our first polling question of the day, which is what you think of when you hear SaaS. We're going to move on in 5, 4. Oh, I still see some people typing. 3, 2, 1. All right, thanks, everyone. Let's go ahead and get into our very first section of the day, which is what is SaaS spend management? So before getting into SaaS spend management, we want to start with some of the basic concepts and kind of build up from there. So to understand what SaaS spend management is, you need to understand what SaaS is. And to understand what SaaS is, you need to understand what cloud computing is. So at a very high level, cloud computing is delivering computing services, things like software, intelligence, databases, general information over the internet, i.e. the cloud. And it's one of the SaaS is one of the main categories of cloud computing, along with infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. So software as a service, which sounds like a lot of you guys knew what that was in the word cloud, everybody uses, that's SaaS, but not everybody knows exactly what it is. It includes a wide variety of different arrangements involving web-based delivery of applications managed by a third-party vendor. Basically, it allows you to access applications through the internet. Now, you might not even realize how often you're using it, and we're going to be talking about some reasons why people are moving to SaaS models as organizations. But of course, one of the most obvious reasons we've seen is a rise in the remote workforce. That moved a lot of technology to the cloud and ultimately increased organizations' software subscriptions, and therefore their SaaS spends really brought that through the roof. In fact, SaaS spend is one of the 3 largest expenses for organizations, along with personnel costs and lease costs. So here are some examples of some common software that you might be familiar with. We've got software as a service on the left that's available via third party over the internet, things like Lease Query, Zoom, that you might use on a daily basis. Got platform as a service where providers still access to anything the customer would need to develop an app. You've got infrastructure as a service, whereas providers still access to resources like servers, data storage, networks, and then data warehouse as a service, which provides data storage and warehouse management services. All of these collectively are known as cloud computing. So again, maybe you use these on a daily basis, or maybe you've got some other ones in here, but everyone uses at least one of these or something else, but just might not realize that it's SaaS. A lot of you out there also may have things like accounting guidance research subscriptions, that would be included as well. Now, why are companies ultimately investing in SaaS? So other than the pandemic and an increased remote workforce, there are a lot of reasons that everything is continuing to move in the direction towards SaaS. And it's really just trending away from on-prem. Now, taking a step back, what is on-prem? On-premise, on-premises, on-prem, few different ways to say it. It's just a method of deploying software where the programs are installed directly on your computer and it runs on your own hardware, it's hosted locally, as opposed to where SaaS and cloud software, it's stored and managed on the provider servers and accessed through like a web browser. So why are companies investing in SaaS products? Well, not only are companies investing in SaaS products, which these are some of the reasons why, which we'll walk through, but it's actually not only easier as a buyer, but as a provider to deploy SaaS more easy than it is for on-prem. So even if you want to continue to stay on-prem, you might not be able to for very long because these providers are, moving from these, legacy on-prem softwares into the cloud. So you might have like a legacy ERP, but in order to get the update or the upgrade, you've got to move to the sort of cloud-based version. So it's easier for vendors to provide SaaS products, but why are companies investing in it? Well, it's more cost-effective. You've got a lower total cost of ownership. I'm just paying for things like subscriptions and usage rather than a very large upfront cost. Provides easier accessibility. Businesses can increase productivity when you have access to these applications from anywhere, from any device, without having to worry about storing these applications locally. SaaS products can be easily scaled up or down to meet your needs, and they can be integrated and implemented rather quickly, rather than these very long, time-consuming, grueling implementation processes. And so, like I mentioned, everything is moving and going in that direction. In fact, according to a study that was done by EY, who we're all familiar with, I actually used to work there, SaaS is expected to surpass 50% of software deployment in the next few years based on percentage of total revenue share. So if you look at your screen here, in 2019, prior to pandemic, on-prem was covering about 59% of the total revenue for versus SaaS for software deployment. But by the end of 2023, SaaS is actually going to exceed 50% of that. And this is only going to continue as time goes on. So I want to talk a little bit about licenses here. So every person on this call probably uses software in some way to do their job, but not everyone understands the software nuances and the different types of licenses. I know I certainly didn't understand this. I knew what a software license was in general. It's contract between the owner of the software and the user. Basically, just establishes the rights. And this, you might be familiar with like an end-user license agreement, but I didn't realize that not all license types are the same. In fact, there's a very significant variation between the types of licenses, and it's still pretty confusing. I'm not even really going to attempt to explain it. So this is a great time actually to bring in my colleague Stephen to talk through these different license types.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, so as we take a look at this slide here, we really want to establish what the purpose of a license really is in the realm of software. So it is a way to establish those rights between the creator, the provider, and the user. And that can come in a variety of different flavors, as we see here. So the first four, the public domain license, the GNU LGPL, permissive license, or copyleft license approach, generally is going to be more open sourced, more accessible for you as a user or even as a distributor of the particular software. So you can make modifications and kind of make this work for your business. But when we think about SaaS management and really how it affects accountants in general, we're mostly focused on this fifth license type, the proprietary license type, because this is going to be the most restrictive of these 5 license types. And generally what this means is that there is some sort of copyright that's governing and limiting the use and distribution of this software. And it's ultimately a way so that developers and organizations can claim and keep ownership of their work. So a lot of the popular applications you're using today, including the one you're on right now, and some of those things that were just displayed in our previous graphic, will be relying on a proprietary license type in order to deliver that software to you. The reason why this is so important is because understanding license types really is a fundamental aspect of SaaS and spend management within this space. So when we think about those proprietary license types, we start seeing differentiation and specialization within SaaS applications that starts creating complexity and confusion. I think everyone on this call, just reading this list here, you've probably seen some variation of all of these different things. And it's unique potentially to every single vendor that you're dealing with and having to manage and account for. So a couple differentiators specifically within SaaS comparatively to some of those other license types or even other software products. SaaS is going to be mostly on a subscription basis, which means it has an ongoing and a recurring cost, but it may also come with one-time fees like installation costs or potentially professional services for things like onboarding or support. This is really beneficial for a customer only because it gives you that flexibility we described. You have a low cost of ownership. You have the flexibility to scale your usage up and down, but then it also can create complexities in exactly what type of usage you have available to you. And because these are always delivered through a subscription online and through the web, all of the maintenance and security apparatuses around applications are generally also handled by these vendors, which your license subscription makes available to you. So as we talk through some of these challenges, right, we start going from subscription to how we're differentiating subscriptions and then how those different types of subscriptions can even be differentiated within the same application. So this is not an exhaustive list. There could be dozens of new models and they're always coming out with new unorthodox ways of actually making software available to customers. And there could even be things that are impossible for us to predict with special terms or kind of unique agreements between you and a vendor as well. But ultimately, as we kind of look through this, we see things like consumption-based or per user. And then within those per users, is it a named user cost? Is it a floating user cost? How do we eventually account for all of this information? And as we talk through some of the strategies today, we'll look at how it's really difficult to capture every single type of license we may be engaged in across every single contract, especially when we may have hundreds of these contracts that are existing within our business. And then ultimately, how do we account and then report against this in an accurate and a reliable way?
Thanks, Stephen. Definitely appreciate your insights there. And again, this is something that I wasn't super familiar with. So a lot of you guys are out there kind of wondering why this matters. It's very important to make sure that you understand what type of licenses that you have and ultimately manage those. So appreciate you kind of walking through that with us, Stephen, today. And we're going to talk just about SaaS management and SaaS license management before we finally land on SaaS spend management. So SaaS management is just monitoring and administering the procurement, lifecycle, and security of SaaS applications that you buy. Essentially, SaaS management is just understanding the full value of your investments and costs and just making sure that you understand what you have. Now, the SaaS applications that you use might have licenses. And so SaaS license management is a subset of SaaS management focused in on monitoring the subscriptions, as well as the licensing, renewals, general purchasing, all of these things that impact your cost. And so as technology grows, mismanaging SaaS licenses is a very common mistake that we see. We also see that there's often unused or underused licenses that can ultimately result in security risks. So it's really important that you make sure that you're managing the SaaS products you use and the license associated with them. Which finally brings us to, well, what is SaaS spend management? That's what we're talking about today. So SaaS spend management is just having a more holistic view and handling of managing your organization's spending on SaaS applications. This includes identifying the different applications that are present, managing terms, renewals, right-sizing the number of licenses that you have, and ultimately cutting costs. Again, why this is so important, but as we talk about SaaS and its availability, what we found is that it's very easy to purchase SaaS, which is a good thing for companies, but this could also lead to mismanagement of SaaS. can be really hard to get a handle on the amount of money you spent because it's so easy to purchase SaaS products. Oh, with that said, we actually want to ask you guys how approximately, right? You might not know approximately how many SaaS applications does your organization have? So we're going to leave this up for a few minutes. Just as a reminder, if you are interested in CPE credit for today, you'll need to make sure that you've joined at slido.com to answer these polling questions. You'll need to answer at least 3 of the 4 polling questions and stay on the presentation for at least 50 minutes. Right. So as we're seeing these polls come in, seeing approximately how many applications does your organization have, a lot of you guys are saying 0 to 25. I'm seeing 25 to 50, obviously is the next bucket. We're seeing a lot of people say, I don't know. And honestly, that's relatively common. We found, and Stephen will talk about this a little bit more, that a lot of people have no idea where there might be duplication. They know what they use on a daily basis, but you have no idea what the department next to you might use. So I'm not surprised to see some I don't knows coming in. Let's see. Still seeing some people answering. Right, so we're going to leave this question open for just a little bit longer. Approximately how many SaaS applications does your organization have? Again, you don't need to necessarily know to the T, but we'd like to just understand in general. It looks like majority of you guys have 0 to 25 different applications. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this up for about 10 more seconds. Make sure you answer the polling question. All right. Going to go ahead and shut this down in 3, 2, 1. All right. Thanks everyone for answering the second polling question of the day. Approximately how many SaaS applications does your organization have? Again, a lot of people answered, I don't know, and that's not incredibly surprising, as we found that a lot of people don't know how many different things they're subscribed to, even themselves, so let alone their entire organization. So now we're going to talk about how this affects you, the accountant, right? So we talked through some license discussion, SaaS, what SaaS bid management is, but why should you care, right? Well, there's a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons that you should care, in addition to everything else we're going to talk about, is there is actually some guidance that you need to make sure that your organization is familiar with. So as there's been such a rise in the amount of software subscriptions over the last few years, the rules have been clarified by the FASB and the GASB, which we'll talk about next. Back in 2018, the FASB actually issued some new guidance for implementation, setup, and other costs that were incurred in a cloud computing arrangement. Now, want to make the distinction here, right? This relates to cloud computing. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, SaaS is a subset of cloud computing. So it does impact you if you've got SaaS. But this provided more clarity and visibility to different fees that are for cloud computing, basically to just set the record straight. Because prior to these updates, there was a challenge for organizations because they didn't necessarily know which costs associated with these could be capitalized. So you need to make sure that you're aware about the capitalization rules for software as an accountant. And with that comes making sure that you're familiar with the proper amortization accounting and testing for impairment, those types of considerations as software becomes obsolete or there's no usage. There could be impairment indicators that you need to monitor and potentially recognize for these capitalized software. Now, if you're a governmental entity out there, and it sounds like we might have had a few of you out there, as on the first question, I saw some people put in GASB 96. The GASB even issued new guidance to address these IT arrangements. GASB statement number 96 for subscription-based IT arrangements was published in 2020 and became effective for organizations with fiscal years beginning after June 15th of 2022. If you're familiar with the GASB 87 standard for leases, it mirrors that, but for subscription-based IT arrangements. Things like your cloud-based ERP systems, Zoom, online payment tools, any sort of data storage that's through the cloud, and even lease query. And so similarly, the GASB came out with this guidance really because there wasn't very stringent or specified rules for subscriptions prior. There's no legacy guidance. Some people might have used GASB 51, but they wanted to, again, set the record straight with the increase in subscriptions throughout the years. So you need to recognize an asset and a liability for GASB 96 for these subscriptions. So again, SaaS is a piece of this, just like it is for FASB, but probably a pretty big piece. Why else should you care? Well, SaaS spend is growing. As you can see on your screen here, Gartner actually predicts that SaaS spending is going to reach $232 billion in 2024, up from $197 billion in 2023. So almost a 20% increase, and this is going to continue to grow. So this market is just truly forcing the hand of not only accountants, organizations to get this under control, but also for these standards boards to provide guidance, as the spending for this is exploding. While this might seem to be a really huge number and might surprise some of you, once you kind of break it down, it's not that hard to believe, considering that the average organization actually subscribes to over 125 different software applications, totaling $1,048 per employee annually. So I know a lot of you out there estimated that you were using between 0 and 25 different softwares. The average organization subscribes to over 125. So I imagine that a lot of you are underestimating that. Maybe you do use only 0 to 25, but a lot of organizations are finding that they are subscribed to way more than they thought they were. And unfortunately, a lot of this money is spent on provisioned licenses that aren't regularly used by employees. And it can get out of hand very quickly because it's not purchased in a very centralized manner. Because SaaS can be purchased very easily, maybe Joe signs up for a free trial using a company credit card for a product that would be helpful for his department and just never cancels. And then you find out that Jessica from the other department is subscribed to a very similar software, and there was no overlap there. They didn't communicate with each other, and suddenly you're paying for 2 project management softwares. I know I'm certainly guilty, not using the least great company card, but using my own card, of signing up for a free trial of something and not canceling it, and then checking my statement later and realize I've been paying for it, not even using it this whole time. Additionally, maybe it's free when you start using it, but then maybe the features that you want are behind a paywall, kind of a freemium model. And because these are typically small expenses, they often start to show up, in expense reports. These small expenses are not drawing a lot of attention, but they can, as an aggregate, be material for organizations when everyone is doing it. So as everyone is doing it, and as these costs increase, accountants not only have to manage the costs for the SaaS itself, but there are also costs that come with mismanagement of SaaS. So while it has a ton of benefits, it's great, very easy to access, there's some security risks and concerns that you need to make sure that you're addressing. And of course, biggest one is just the fact that it's cloud-based. They contain a lot of sensitive data, and you, the accountant, has to deal with the financial implications of not managing these risks and not managing these SaaS products appropriately. In fact, according to Gartner, through 2027, organizations that fail to centrally manage their SaaS lifecycles are going to remain 5 times more susceptible to a cyber incident or data loss due to misconfiguration. And nobody wants that. That affects everybody, right? Any sort of data loss or cyber incident, that stops everything and happens every day. So what are some of the SaaS risks you need to make sure that your organization is managing? Access management. Inquire with your vendor about any sort of network security, monitoring. Can a single access point expose your private information? What about disaster recovery? What happens to the data in case of a disaster? Will they restore your data? What about any risk of misconfiguration? As SaaS can potentially be complex, there's a chance for misconfigurations, which can affect the availability of the product to you. Does the provider hold security certifications and meet data protection requirements, things like SOX compliance, HIPAA, if you're healthcare? What about Data retention. How long do they hold on to your data? And who owns it? Is it the provider or is it you? Where is the data stored? Is it encrypted, secure on a cloud service provider like AWS? Where is it stored in a private data center? And then lastly, big one here, what about privacy and data breaches? How well can the organization or the application overcome these type of security breaches? So again, as accountants, you need to make sure that you're managing and forecasting out the appropriate expenses for software, but also you need to deal with any sort of recovery cost that comes from a cyber attack, which happens if you mismanage your SaaS products. You end up paying the price and having to manage these costs. And as it turns out, healthcare spends more than any other industry to recover from a cyber attack, which is not surprising, but this recovery cost can be detrimental to an organization who does not manage their SaaS appropriately. All right, so with that in mind, we're going to talk through some SaaS spend management optimization strategies, and I'm going to bring in Stephen to talk through that, and we'll get started from here.
All right, thank you, Rachel.
Yeah.
So as we just went through, there are a lot of different considerations we have to make whenever we're investing into SaaS. And I want to go back to those numbers we saw of the 167 to 197 to 230-ish billion dollars being invested into these products every single year. So ultimately, a significant amount of capital is being put into and invested into these tools. And this has been happening for quite a while now. Over the past decade, all of this has been building in this direction. And I'm sure every single one of us on the call here has probably heard a term, digital transformation. But these have been really massive undertakings that are stretching multi-year projects and are really requiring us as businesses to completely replace or redevelop legacy processes, and sometimes just come up with completely novel ways of actually running our business and operating on a day-to-day basis. And I want to kind of frame this particular challenge with this header here, with the hidden cost of SaaS is too great to ignore. Because we're investing in this, we're susceptible to these types of risks from a financial health perspective within our business. And this first piece here, the cost of adopting the cloud is increasing, and it's expected to continually increase by 15 to 20% annually. So every single year, you're going to be investing into more cloud-based technology, and what you're seeing is that your SaaS contracts are expanding, prices are increasing, and really they're rising to meet that equilibrium that you've been benefiting from for many years now, which is all that increased productivity and flexibility within your business. So it's not wasted money necessarily, but it is growing quickly. And what we're seeing is that organizations that are failing to organize and centralize this SaaS spend management could end up wasting up to 25% of that total spend. And the reality is SaaS portfolios are complex. I think I was looking at some of the word cloud where it was tough, complex, complicated, obtuse. All of those words were kind of popping up here and there, which don't just necessarily describe what SaaS is, it describes how it feels to manage, which is true. It's almost impossible for you, if you're not centralizing this as a program, to have the right insight into what applications are being used, which probably leads to some of our undercounting potentially within our second poll question there. Who's actually using it? Or the classic one is, what purpose does this software even serve? Like, it's not uncommon we just find an application, have no idea what it is, but we've been paying for it the entire time, and it shows up on a GL way after the fact. And because of this, your potential spending could really spiral out of control, and a lot of this can go into wasted spaces. And then we look at just even the behavior and the utilization of SaaS within an organization. And so this number jumped out to me as much higher than I even predicted, somebody who deals with this on a regular basis. And it really boils down to employees are not using all of the SaaS that is provided to them. So up to 50% of these provision licenses could be underutilized or maybe not utilized at all across your business, but the cost of that license is 100% being realized by the actual business. And this can be due to a number of different factors. So we may think of a few instances where maybe an application is seasonal. So think about something like performance management reviews, where you're really not using it 11 out of 12 months every single year, but potentially you're paying for it the entire time. The purpose of the application could be infrequent. Travel apps kind of jump to mind for me in particular, where maybe in a past life, and maybe in Rachel's as well at EY, she was traveling to client sites and going to these places to do this work. And now over the past few years, I've just been working from home, and so have you. So I still have a license provision for me within a travel application, but I'm rarely using it or infrequently using it. Sometimes employees just move on to something better. That happens for all of us in a lot of different ways in how we work, where there was a solution today, and by tomorrow our needs have changed. We're needing to adapt to a new way of doing work, and we just find a different solution. And we may not tell everybody about that solution, and we start incurring those costs and potentially duplicating costs because of that. And then kind of this other underlying factor within kind of SaaS as part of your business is that you may not even know you have access to a bunch of these applications that you've actually been provisioned for. The choice of SaaS is overwhelming. We have dozens of applications that are likely set up across the entire enterprise, but we may only use a fraction of those every single day. We're probably working within 10 to 15, but could be provisioned for 50. So we don't even realize that we could take advantage of those applications, and ultimately we just end up wasting the money spent on those licenses. Regardless of all the reasons, these costs are real and they're felt directly by IT, finance, and accounting teams acutely. And without the tools to solve for it, these costs can continue to rise. Next slide. So I want to kind of summarize that whole problem statement slide with this quote at the top, which I think is perfectly apt at describing this sort of scenario from this executive here. And it's almost half the money I spend on SaaS is wasted. The problem is I don't know which half. And industry research organizations are starting to recognize and track this problem to get a better understanding of where this really is headed in the future. And so we can look at this quote here from Gartner, where they're predicting that by 2026, 50% of organizations will have moved to centralized SaaS application management because of all those challenges we've listed. And this isn't just tracking expenses or reporting on those expenses. This is going to look at things like monitoring usage and provisioning and deprovisioning for all of these users as well. And G2 is reporting that they're anticipating that cloud cost management and SaaS spend management in particular will be at the top of the priority list for IT leaders that need to take control of their ever-growing cloud portfolio costs. I don't think this is a conversation that's foreign to anybody that's on this call today or anybody who's been responsible for managing SaaS in your business over the past year. If there really is a sincere focus on getting these costs under control. So moving to the next slide here, we want to take a moment and just kind of talk about the current pain we may be feeling around actually managing SaaS. So we've gone through all of the risks it poses to your business, how difficult it is to kind of capture all this information, and then we look at the solutions available to us to actually handle and address these challenges on a day-to-day basis. And it really boils down to, out of the dozens of different customers we've spoken to over the past several months, a very large majority are still using Excel or Google Sheets to manage all of their software subscriptions. It's generally a mix of reports maybe pulled from an ERP, or IT is manually uploading logs, or potentially you're just kind of opening it up and every department head is just adding and removing things as they see them, as they're personally managing them, and things get out of date quickly. And just to compound this problem of how difficult it is to create a database of all of your software spend in the spreadsheet, people that are doing these jobs are coming and leaving your company and maybe just be moving to different roles. And a lot of that tribal knowledge starts getting lost within that particular fluctuation of all of those operational roles. So some of this information can get out of date very quickly and may just be inaccurate as a whole. And then in an effort to try to improve accuracy of all of this information, we see the classic approach of email reconciliation, where we're sending out surveys to all of our end users or to all of our department heads and asking questions like, hey, are you still using this? If it even is answered at all, it's not giving us a very high fidelity answer to the actual question we're posing, which is, how do I control the cost around this if it is not being used at this time? And SaaS management really is a complicated business problem, and using tools like a spreadsheet or an email and relying upon those as your processes and your actual apparatuses to manage this is not a winning solution for this problem. So moving to the next slide, we can take a look at 3 key optimization areas that we recommend from LeaseQuery that every organization can start looking at starting today to improve this situation within their own business. The first one is going to be around streamlining purchasing. I think Rachel had touched on this where, she's using a credit card to go buy something and it's just kind of showing up in her own statement, but not necessarily within the businesses. And what this ultimately does for an organization is that it creates a significant amount of blind spots all across the SaaS ecosystem and allows for shadow IT to proliferate. And shadow IT is a term to describe basically when somebody goes and procures or starts utilizing software that's not necessarily sanctioned by the organization or essentially managed by the company. And as we saw, that can show up in a lot of different ways. Credit card transactions, you're expensing software potentially, so every month you're sending in a reimbursement for it. A department head just may go buy it